Welcome to our complimentary webinar entitled Learner-Driven Learning Management Systems in a Global Environment. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin Spencer and I'll be your moderator for our session. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a little about Brandon Hall Group. Brandon Hall Group was established in 1992 and was formerly Brandon Hall Research. As you may know, we are a research and analyst advisor firm. We have nearly 200,000 subscribers to our services and over 10,000 clients globally. Brandon Hall focuses on the areas of learning and development, talent management, leadership development, and executive management. We also specialize in sales effectiveness and marketing impact. We have several offerings for our members, including our Research Member Center, our knowledge bases, a Smart Choice certification program, and our Excellence Awards program. I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Stacey Harris is the Vice President of Research and Advisory Services here at Brandon Hall Group. Unfortunately, Jason Clymer from Upside Learning was not able to join us, so in his place we'll have Amit Gautam. Amit is the founder and director of Technology Solutions and is the techie at Upside Learning. He leads the Technology Solutions team and has played a key role in bringing an innovative approach to the traditional learning management system. In his 13 years of professional life, he has had the experience in managing a startup, managing technology projects, consulting on technology solutions, and architecting and developing technology solutions. He has worked with some of the big names in the technology domain, mainly Taxa Infotech, Infosys Technologies, and an e-learning company in India. I would like to thank Upside Learning for sponsoring today's webinar. Upside Learning is a leader in custom learning solutions, including e-learning development and mobile learning, as well as a learning management system. Its award-winning innovative solutions are used by over 150 clients from a diverse set of industries and countries, including global leaders such as Tyco Learning, ENSCO, Kraft Asia, L'Oreal, Bell, L&T, and HP. Before we begin, I would like to invite you as attendees to take an active role in today's presentation. There will be poll questions throughout today's webinar, as well as a question and answer period near the close of our session. If you wish to ask a question during today's presentation, we would encourage you to do so. You may ask a question by typing in the question box of your control panel. I will be monitoring today's questions and will be providing some of your questions to today's presenters for their feedback as time permits. I will now turn today's platform over to Brandon Hall Group's Stacey Harris, who will fill us in on today's agenda.
Thanks, Erin, and hello, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking the time to meet with us today. As many of you know, I'm normally calling from Ohio, where it's actually quite warm and sunny there today, too, but I'm now in Florida today, where it's bright sunshine, and looking forward to an enjoyable rest of the week here in Florida, doing some leadership meetings and some events this week, including the e-learning Guild's Learning Strategy event. So we had a great week this week. And I see we got some people who are calling in from Calgary. I have a couple of thank yous and hi, Stacey. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I do want to let you know today that we do realize there might be a few audio challenges. So please bear with us. I am calling remotely from a wonderful hotel room, but the phone line doesn't seem to be quite as good as we normally have. And we also have Amit, who is doing a great job filling in. Jason had a family emergency, really wanted to be with us today, but obviously family comes first in all of our lives. And so Amit has agreed to fill in today and try and help us along with the webinar. So he'll be answering as many questions as he's able to do. He is on a voice over IP connection, so that connection might be a little bit difficult to hear from time to time. But we're going to do our very best today to make sure that you have a pleasant webinar experience. And if you do have any follow-up questions, always you can follow up after the event if anything was unclear or you weren't able to hear it. But for everyone, I do want to say thanks for joining us today. We are going to be talking today about learner-driven learning management systems in a global environment. So we're going to be covering a lot of global information as well as general user experience information in the learning management space. One of the challenges we know in the market is often having an environment where users feel like not only are they comfortable and it's easy to access information, but also that the experience is what they expect from their consumer experiences today. And so we're going to talk a lot about how that fits in creating an environment for a learning management system. The goal here is to really talk about not only the LMS landscape and its environments, but research on the LMS usability and use cases to help understand that usability issues. We're also going to talk about it in the global market, how things might change and how things might stay the same. Amit's going to be helping and adding quite a bit of insight into that with some of the work that Upside Learning has done in the past. We're going to talk about mobile and social learning experiences and how those things are playing into this learner management system from a learning perspective. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you gather learning expectations. What are some of the best practices that we've seen in the market? Some things people often don't think about but are really invaluable in today's environment. One thing I do want to comment on is that even though our sponsor, it's great, they provide us with the opportunity to be able to really give some educational amount here. This is not focused on just any one LMS. So as you're kind of looking through this, I want you to kind of envision the discussion around your current environment and how this fits what you're doing and what you're doing with your users. And that's going to be a great opportunity for us to kind of dialogue around what Upside Learning and Amit has seen in with their clients and how the value has been translated from a user perspective in their environments as well. So the goal is to talk about this on a much global level today. So the very first thing that we're going to talk a little bit about, just jumping right into the conversation, is some research data. So for many of you, you are getting to get preview data. This is one of the most exciting things about being in research is when we're able to share the most recent information. We just analyzed, for many of those who might be following the Brandon Hall name, you know that we had a relationship-centered learning survey out around the new direction that learning was heading in the market. We're really excited about that data coming out. We had over 600 responses to it, and basically we're just analyzing the data to this week, and so you're getting a little bit of preview data this week. We had a little bit last week that we shared in a webinar as well. Basically what preview preliminary data means is that when you see the final data sets when it comes out into reports or in other items, it might be up a percentage or down a percentage because we're still working on cleaning out organizations and validating information in it a little bit, but this still gives you a good sense of where some things are going to fall. And this particular question was around what are the top learning priorities for organizations in the coming year, and they were allowed to select their top 2 learning priorities. And what I was really excited about is that what you're seeing here is that some of the things that were big issues over the last several years have shifted, and some of the things are definitely still staying the same. So if you look at their top issues, top challenges, and top learning priorities, one of the first ones is creating a learning strategy and a plan. That hasn't changed much. A lot of organizations have been really focusing on strategies and plans for several years in the market. We also know that they're going to be focusing on designing and delivering leadership management programs, and I think there's a much bigger discussion around leadership management at some point, I think, in the overall talent management market, but it's obviously continuing to be a big challenge for organizations. But the third one here was probably the most important for this particular topic. For this particular topic, the third biggest learning priority for all these organizations that we spoke with was transitioning ILT to a technology-based training format. And I think what you'll notice is it's not any one specific format because there is mobile and social that falls a little bit lower in this list of top learning priorities, but it's really focusing on creating an environment in some sort of a technology platform where they're taking what they were doing in instructor-led training, not all of it, but much of it, and transitioning it so that it works well in a blended environment. And so that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today, which is that if a big focus of yours is also transitioning instructor-led training to some sort of technology-based training format, it's not just about putting it into an LMS or just replacing what you were doing. It's actually rethinking the whole process. And I think when we start talking with Amit and the work that they've been doing at Upside Learning, what you're going to find is that many of the organizations start on the path of implementing a learning management system, and their focus is on administration or technology, and it's not on the learning experience. And so this is where we want to try and take the dialogue today with everyone. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide and just talk a little bit about the landscape right now around learning management systems. Currently, on average, this came out of a survey that Brandon Hall did in November of last year, so that's where the data is at, that we did around learning management system trends. And we find that about 78% of the organizations that we spoke with had learning management systems, and 22% of the organizations have no LMS in place at this point in time. That's about average. You kind of see that number waffle over the last 2 to 3 years, anywhere between 30 to 20%. And so we know that as new organizations get into the market, they need LMSs, and some organizations merge and solidify. So that number hasn't changed a great deal. What I think has changed a lot, and I think this is the thing you're going to continue to see a little bit more, is that the amount of divisional systems has gone down in a lot of organizations. So about 71% of the organizations that we spoke with had an enterprise-wide system. And that's something that we are seeing, is that a lot more organizations, if they're not consolidating to a single, they're consolidating to, one or two systems within their organization at an enterprise level. And then there still are, though, a lot of organizations that are using divisional learning management systems, which means basically they're being used within individual, business units. I did get a question, and I apologize. I'll go ahead and answer that. ILT, for my previous slide, what is ILT? So for those of you who those acronyms sometimes we get into here in the learning space, ILT is instructor-led training. And instructor-led training is really any form of classroom environment training, and that's what ILT is in most cases in learning space. So let's keep kind of going along and talking a little bit about, so if about 70% of the organizations currently have an LMS in place, what are some of the top reasons for upgrading or switching LMSs? And I think this is where things start to get a little bit interesting, because, and it really lends itself to this dialogue that we're going to have around usability, because, enterprise integration is often a huge issue, and it is the #1 issue that organizations have in re-looking at implementing new learning management systems across their organizations. But the reason integration is so important isn't always so much about the back end. It is obviously a back end discussion about how data flows and administrative steps that you have to reduce. But often integration is as much about the end user experience, that they don't have to log into multiple sites, that they don't have to see two different branding versions or two different environments where buttons are laid out. That's a lot about what integration is as well. The other one here that I wanted to point out, the third highest reason why organizations are looking at switching their LMSs, is around system appears outdated. And that kind of seems a little bit vain. Is it really important if it's outdated? But in all reality, consumers are on the technology every day today. And if you really aren't thinking about how the system looks, and this is as much of the organization that is setting up the portal as it is the learning management system environment, because sometimes you can make a lot of changes through configuration, through style sheets. And so really understanding what your audience's expectations are when they think something looks modern and something is meeting their expectations is really important, obviously. The other reasons people are looking at upgrading learning management systems are learner needs have changed and lack of social learning capabilities. And as well as system is difficult to use. So let's just take those two. The system is difficult to use and the learning needs have changed. As organizations mature, as organizations change, you find a lot of organizations that often aren't paying attention to how the changes of their learners, the changing needs of their learners, and many times they get to a point where they have new certification requirements, maybe new sales training requirements, new programs that are not leveraging the current learning management system totally. And so what they end up doing is doing workarounds. And if the learning function isn't paying attention to those changing needs, then all of a sudden maybe 2, 3 years down the road, they end up in a situation where people are going around the system to get things accomplished, which then defeats the purpose of having a single environment where people can track their learning programs. Same thing with the system is difficult to use. If the system isn't intuitive, if you have to break out a manual every time you go to use it, or you have to use a lot of help and support, again, here now you have the opportunity for many cases where organizations are struggling with the fact that people again try and go around the tool, and that's the last thing you want with a learning environment. Over 33% of the Brandon Hall Group surveyed organizations are looking to upgrade and replace their current systems, as we had said. And so I think it's just something to keep a note as you're looking. We often look at learning management systems sometimes as a standalone tool, but they are very complex systems. I know this picture up on the screen can almost be a little overwhelming at times because it covers so many things that are important to an individual looking at learning management systems. But let's break down this particular graphic a little bit more for everybody. So there tend to be what we call core learning management elements, and those really fit in the upper left-hand corner. I've just circled them there with a highlighter. And those are things that learning management systems have been doing for a long time. You have pretty high expectations that almost all the learning management systems are doing these at a pretty good level. Those are things like enrollment, launching online courses, doing some sort of testing, tracking progress, creating learning paths, and reporting on what people have been accessing. And these are things that everyone should expect to be done very well in a learning management system. But you also often have, over on the right-hand side over here, right-hand upper quadrant, is what we call the robust elements. Now, this is where your organizations are starting to expect that their learning management system is going to manage classrooms, especially if you do have ILT that you're converting, or if you're going to be doing any kind of blended learning environment, you have to have a managed classroom component. Virtual classrooms, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a global space, virtual classrooms are sometimes integrated with the learning management systems and sometimes not in global environments. And what does that do to your user experience, right? There's a lot of organizations at that point in a robust LMS that are looking for managing competencies or looking at performance support elements. And here you might be looking at skill gap analysis or certification elements. And again, these are all things that help you add additional capabilities within your learning management system. But the one thing you'll notice about them all, they also in many cases create an easier environment for your end user, if they're done well, to be able to manage their entire learning in one single place, which again, creating that end user experience. So those robust elements add to the ability of that end user being able to have a single experience. Below that, you'll find that a lot of organizations obviously are looking at talent management over here in this left-hand quadrant on the lower left-hand. And those are things like onboarding and leadership development, workforce planning and sourcing and recruiting. A lot of organizations are looking at creating an integrated system. There's many organizations, though, who still feel that that is not necessary to integrate those systems fully or have a single platform. But as you notice in this diagram, the data from talent does feed into your learning system. So there is a really important element here to think about. What are you doing in your talent environment that needs to be addressed in your learning environment? On the right-hand side, then, kind of following the circle around the bottom right-hand quadrant, you also see things like collaboration. And this is where you've got social learning and networks and media and mobile in many cases. And the idea now that not only are you tracking courses, you have certifications, you have strategic ways that you're going to acquire data and that you're managing your talent, but now you're also allowing people to create an environment where they're adding to that learning. And this is really important about social, is that social isn't just about people chatting back and forth. It's about the fact that the individual voices are adding up to something more than what they individually are, because basically by adding to that learning, you're creating a whole new learning element. And so there's a lot of insight there about knowing who are the most valuable people within your organization, who understand all the information, who talk about it, share it. Those are things that happen in the collaborative environment. So all of these things are really important when you're thinking about what a learning management system is. But oftentimes people look at these things and they get overwhelmed with what an LMS is and how it fits together. And the real important thing is that having these features and functions is important if you have clear business cases for each of them. But more important than any one of these 4 quadrants is the usability of that system. If that system isn't user-friendly, none of these features and functions make a difference, and from the research that we have done. So let's talk a little bit about what is your learning audience's expectations from its LMS. If you do have an LMS, or if you don't, we have an option here if you have other. But if you have an LMS or you're looking at an LMS, do you know what your audience expectations are? And we're going to go ahead and launch our first poll here to get the audience talking a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Does your audience looking for an intuitive portal environment? Are they looking for ease in accessing individual training elements? Are they looking for clear learning paths? Are they looking for collaborative learning environments? Is that really a #1 driver for them? Or other? Is there something else that we haven't mentioned? And if you have an other, please feel free to put it over in the questions box. I'd love to hear your comments on what other things you think is really big expectations for your learning audience, or the primary expectation for your learning audience, I should say. So we're going to give everyone a few moments to go ahead and vote on that. Again, number 1 is intuitive portal environment. 2 is ease in accessing individual training elements. 3 is clear learning paths, and 4 is collaborative learning environments, and then finally other. Like I said, if you have other, please feel free to comment on it in the Q&A session, because it's interesting to see what other people are feeling are high expectations from their learning audiences. So we have just about 74% of the audience. We'll give it just another moment or two. So if you do have a comment, feel free to go ahead and make that. And then we're going to go ahead and close that. So of our 75 or 80 participants today, let's go ahead and share that data. 28% said that their learning audiences are expecting an intuitive portal environment. 49% said ease in accessing individual training elements. 14 said clear learning paths, and 7 said collaborative learning environments, and 2% said other. And then I got someone over here on the side said answered ease, but if they knew it was available, would probably want clear learning paths. I see that. That's a great comment. So, you know, they want ease of use, but they also want, you know, something that's valuable to them. So great comment over there on our Q&A point. So let's go ahead and move into our, I'm going to go ahead, oh, I don't think I shared that, and I'm going to hide it now. Making sure that I get to the next one, and talk a little bit about these various audiences that we're all focused in. And we'll bring Amit into this conversation here a little bit, because I think audience types often get overlooked when organizations are going through the selection process, particularly if, you know, it's a small group selecting an LMS, or if it's a group that will be maybe focused on the administrative components, right? So there's really are 3-4 audiences for most LMSs. There's definitely the end users and the learners, right? Those are obviously a big group. They're the ones who go in and access the training, access the information, and are looking to get the big return on investment out of that system. But there's also administrators on the far right side over here. As you'll see, the administrators are us in many cases. Those of us in the learning technology space, HR technology space, collaborative HR learning spaces. These are people who have to kind of focus on administering that system. Oftentimes forgotten between these two audiences is we often call the monkey in the middle is the managers and the stakeholders. So the reason the managers and the stakeholders are sort of important in this audience discussion topic is because they also have to have a good experience, and in many cases their experience outweighs the end user experience when it comes to making decisions about where you're going to be heading with your learning management system. These are obviously the people who have the budget for the learning management system, and these are the people who are looking to the learning management system as being able to view critical business information that's going to help them make business decisions. So I often tell people, don't forget about your managers and stakeholders. Now what you'll see here is a nice long list. I'm not going to read through it, of what the end user learners are their top tasks that get accomplished in the learning management system space. In the middle here, same thing with the managers and stakeholders, and over on our right hand side, the same thing with administrators. So basically what we wanted to identify, and we did this by taking a look at some of our use cases and some of the work that we're doing with organizations when they're going through the process of doing technology strategies right now. But we also gathered some of this data from our awards case studies as well, and looking at where were people actually expecting their learners and their managers and stakeholders and administrators to have touch points with the LMSs. And these were really the top things that came out over and over again when we talked to organizations and we looked at some of those materials. The end users really had a lot to do with obviously accessing both the content as well as their learning environments, as well as signing up for courses, and a lot to do with communications. They're accessing communication to them about the learning programs, the learning tools. Managers and stakeholders obviously had a lot more focused on looking at important reports, tracking things for their employees, managing even subject matter experts. That was an interesting one that we saw through a couple of strategy processes, and definitely through a lot of our awards programs. We saw that people really focused on the managers working with subject matter experts ensuring they were appropriately labeled in a learning environment maybe. And then administrators obviously have a lot more complicated areas such as setting up certifications, setting up classrooms, managing the communication through groups, tracking group compliance, those type of things. So theirs is at a usually at a group level, and they've got to kind of manage that whole process. So these are things that's important to think about is what are the tasks they're doing. When you think about the tasks then, what that should drive you to is what we call primary use case requests. And use case requests are really important because when you think about selecting a learning management system, the number one way that you can really identify if this learning management system is going to have the user experience that's going to work with your audience is by actually asking that learning management system solution provider and vendor to go through a use case scenario for you, a use case scenario that is driven by these various audience types. A use case scenario that looks at how the end user will do something, and that looks at how the managers and stakeholders will view something, and it looks at how the administrator will complete tasks within that environment. And Amit, I just wanted to ask you, just kind of get you kind of talking a little bit in the conversation, can you give us an idea of how many use case scenarios you guys see at Upside Learning? Is that a way that you see a lot of organizations coming to you and asking you to demo your product these days? Is it through use case scenarios? Just making sure that we have Amit.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yep.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you. There you go. Yep.
Great. Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us on the webinar today. Yes, I think we do take a lot of time in our initial part of the process when we are selling our system to a prospect. And we do like to understand exactly the requirements from the customer side. Are they looking to what are they looking to fulfill from the LMS? Is it the e-learning part or blended learning part, or how they have the workflows defined in their organizations which they want to map to the LMS. And more often than not, we would like and we do map that workflow to what we have in the system, and we take them through detailed demonstrations of, if let's say you want to do this, then this is how we can do that. And we add data, we demonstrate by adding actual data and take them through those workflows. Because that's, I would say one of the best ways to be able to map what we have and what the customer needs. And using such use cases also helps them ask a lot of questions which they didn't really think through in the first place, and also understand, make them understand much better how the system would fit into the requirements. And we've realized that during those demonstrations there are a lot of small fine print which comes out from the prospect side, which they also sometimes didn't know they were looking for, and they needed in the system. So I think using use cases to demonstrate what we have to be able to map the system to the workflows is more than just showing how we have done the system, but it is all about mapping the system workflows to what the customers are looking for. So we do use use cases most often than not.
Great. Yeah, and I think, because I often find that many people are sometimes a little hesitant or afraid to go to solution providers and vendors and say, I want you to do it show me how you would do this the way we do it, using our workflow. Now, we often tell organizations, be flexible, because a lot of times they might have a better way to do that with their system. But as you said, Amit, that sometimes if we don't match to their workflow, we miss some of the really important elements that they're looking for. And I think you'll see some of these expectations here on this list. I mean, if you look at some of these expectations, things like, is the learning system transparent? If I want an environment where I don't want people to actually really have to go into the LMS, I want them maybe to click from an email and access a good portion of their learning. Does the LMS provide that capability, and can you actually show that in a demonstration, right? That's the transparency component of it. Is the environment intuitive to navigate? I think a lot of times organizations, they have a lot of help desk, and that's really great, and you have a lot of help elements, but if it's not something that I can sit down and look at intuitively and navigate, it may not be the right thing for my audience, particularly if you have an audience that is very comfortable with current technologies today in their mobile environment, or even in the current Google or Facebook environments, where pretty much everything's laid out for you. You don't really use a help desk too often. You just kind of figure it out as you're going through it. Is the search function Google-like? I mean, that the word Googled has now become something that is in everybody's vocabulary, which means that basically you have to think about if that search functionality doesn't work like Google, that's okay. But what's the real benefits of moving away from something that a whole generation of people are really comfortable with at this point from a search functionality component? Can I access the content where and when I need it? Is it available in the environments that your audience will be available at, in the PC and the mobile, offline or online? Do they always have access to the internet? Do they maybe not have access to the internet? What does that look like? Does the content run smoothly? Is it located in a location where the bandwidth won't be an issue, whether I have low bandwidth or they have low bandwidth? What does that look like? What does that experience look like? Is all the information I need within 2 or 3 clicks? That's always a question I get. And, early web user interface models, oh, everything should be within 2 or 3 clicks. Well, that's a little impossible sometimes in a learning management environment, but for end users, they do expect that they're not going to have to drill down too far to find the things that they're looking for. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Is the help function available? If I do need it, is the help function there quickly, right? Does the system have a workflow process? Does it fit my workflow process and thinking? This is one that I actually was talking to Michael Rochelle, who does a lot of our technology work for us, and we were talking about the fact that people really have become kind of accustomed to the way certain systems work or the way they have to get work done in an environment, and does this system adapt to that? If I've got to talk to my customer and then copy information and move it into a system, then go back to it again, does this system allow me to do those type of cut and paste and moving around and pulling up all the screens at the right time in a really easy workflow without having to jump around too much? Does the system look and feel like business and consumer technology they use today, right? That's a good question to ask. And then can I comment, share, post, or rate my experience with the content or any action that I'm providing? Without a doubt, one of the #1 things we're seeing across the board in expectations with any technology, whether that's learning, talent, sales technology, marketing technology, is that if I'm taking an action in this environment, or I've got something I'm looking at in this environment, that I'm able to comment on it, I'm able to share my thoughts on it, I'm able to maybe push it out to someone else. If you think about all the technology that they're seeing in the cloud and the web environment today, they're able to share information and they're able to comment on information. And people have high expectations about that today. So let's take a little bit of a look at this. I want to go a deeper dive now and talk about all of those things are kind of general expectations. Those are things that Brandon Hall has pulled out from its research and the work it's done with multiple organizations around their technology and their end user expectations. But Amit, you guys at Upside Learning have done a lot of work on an international level around these same type of topics. What is it that our learner expectations in a global level that might change maybe based on what regions people are currently living and working within? And would you be able to maybe walk them through this grid, which I think is a great grid, that kind of talks about by region the type of expectations learners might have that you guys have seen through your work on a global basis?
Sure, I'll do that. Before I elaborate on the metrics a little bit more, I just like to share that apart from looking after the LMS as a product in our company, I also am responsible for direct sales in North America, Middle East, and India region, which gives me enough chances to meet a lot of people across these 3 geographies primarily, and I have traveled a lot to meet new prospects and customers. So some of this information is also feedback from the meetings we've had so much in the past with our prospects and customers. What we've realized, and this is kind of an indicative matrix, but on a broad scale, we do realize that there are differences in how the users, end users, and even the customers look at the system, and how they prioritize different modules or components of the system when they are looking to buy or switch to a new LMS. Now, let's take the first example, e-learning. Now, e-learning is required in all places because that's the core, as you mentioned in one of your slides, the core LMS requires to do e-learning management. So I think that's a no-brainer. It's required in all geographies because that's the starting point of the LMS. Coming to classroom training, we have, it's our experience with both our existing customers and people we meet for new business, that classroom training is more popular and in demand across regions like India and Middle East. Primarily, based on our opinion, could be because India, Middle East are still, I would say, a little behind adoption of e-learning, and they, when you move to a new concept like e-learning, it's not a very new concept so far, but I think they are still using both e-learning and classroom training, so they want to blend both these things into the LMS, which we have seen that in countries like US or even European countries or even Asia Pacific like Australia, New Zealand, there are more organizations with less requirements on classroom training than we will find in India and Middle East. Similarly, for virtual classroom, it's the opposite, primarily because of the bandwidth availability and the adoption of the technology per se, using tools like WebEx, GoToMeeting. I think early on, we found that in the Western countries and in Asia Pacific countries like Australia, New Zealand, we found adoption of virtual classroom and a need of that module or something like that in the LMS itself is higher than what we have found in India and Middle East regions. Similarly, for assessment solutions are more or less like e-learning. A lot of people need that, but we have in our experience we've realized and found that in Middle East it is a little low on the adoption level and requirement level, but otherwise across all of the geographies there's a good requirement to have an assessment module within the system. Companies want to be able to create assessments from the system, then kind of administer them to the user group, and then report on them and run reports on who has done what. Now, coming to the next point, which is interesting, mobile learning. Mobile learning, it's a kind of a it's in a kind of a state of dilemma where the adoption of mobile itself is higher in countries like APEC in India, but the use of mobile to leverage it for learning is still a little low. So that's why you'll find those two blanks there, because in terms of use and need of mobile learning from an LMS or with an LMS is lower in APEC and India region than we have found in US, European countries and the Middle East. So more companies are asking for either a mobile compatibility of the LMS or extra tools which work on mobile phones or mobile devices to be able to leverage the technology for performance support, on-time access, real-time access to information, and even extension of the LMS per se onto the mobile devices. And similarly for the next two things, authoring solutions in e-commerce, I think we have found that more companies, organizations in the US and the European region, they are looking to have a solution in within the LMS environment which they can use to author their own courses. Could be template driven, could be whiteboard kind of templates, but they have a bigger requirement than other geographies where they need a solution in place where they can quickly go and author some courses which are SCOM compliant or ASCC compliant. And we have found that this particular component is required or needed more in US and the European countries, not so much in APAC, India or the Middle East. Also for e-commerce, we in our experience, training companies in US and in European countries, they have a slightly higher inclination to use online payment mechanism or e-commerce within the system. And this is more true for training companies who sell training as a business. Though there are companies like that in other geographies, but they are still hesitant or not really, as much in kind of sync with online payments. They do have e-commerce, but they use it mostly as offline payment mechanism. Now, multilingual is a nice concept because this is, if you see, Middle East is a key example where the native language of the entire area is Arabic, but they have a huge population which also knows English and only knows English. They're learning Arabic, so they have a kind of a diasporic population where there is part of population which knows only Arabic and they want to learn English, and the other way around also. So in areas like Middle East, Asia Pacific, and also in European region where they have more than one language which learners have or they understand, there's a huge demand for a multilingual system it could be either just 2 languages, or for somebody like one of our customers we will showcase in the presentation next forward, and they have requirements in English, German, Dutch, and other European languages also. So this multilingual, I think, plays a big role in areas where there are more than one language within the user group. We have seen that even in US, where Spanish is a requirement, but when we compare it with the need we have in other geographies, I think it is not to that level. Though it is, we've discussed that with multiple companies, but I think it is still not as high as we have seen in the geographies like APAC and Middle Eastern European countries. Then apart from these key areas or key modules, there are certain specific things which geographies may have. Like Australia has a compliance requirement with AVITMIS, which is a standard where which governs the training companies and all companies to be able to provide information about every learner. So they have to compile information about the learners' training records and send it to the government bodies. So so typically companies in this region, they looking for an LMS which has this compliance built in. On the same lines, something like CPD is a requirement in the European or UK market primarily, where they have a need to be able to track CPD points for each learner or each user. So yes, so there are differences we have realized and we have found across these geographies, and it's pretty interesting to see the range of the differences. And but yes, we we have been working on all of them, and the solution definitely we have tried and attempted to make it as widespread as possible, so that we can cover specific needs of each of the geographies.
Yeah, Amit, I love, when we first started talking about this, the fact that you guys had actually started to track what things were being used more and which were being used less, which things were more important and why maybe. I did want to just comment, because someone did ask what AVETMISS stood for, and it was the Australian Vocational Education and Training and Management Information Statistical Standards. I think I've got all that right, so just if you do want to look that up. But these, I think, are really great ways to think about learner expectations and maybe even how they then translate into functions in a learning management system, which I think is really important. And then I know you guys had a couple of case examples here, Amit. One was this regional learning portal in the English environment. I don't know if you want to say a few words and then I can go on to the next samples, or if you want me just to go through all of them and show them all together.
Yeah, I think you can just pull them up together, and these are, as I was mentioning, one of our UK-based customers, Global Knowledge. They are a US-based, primarily a US headquartered company which provides training on various IT subjects to a lot of customers, and they were looking for an LMS which could cater to their multiple customers across So for them, the multilingual part is a key element. So we've just showcased a few examples of how the system looks like in English, German, and Dutch languages. So this highlights the importance of multiple languages in the same system, because the user groups are spread across various geographies in the world, and so the need of a system to be able to cater to that is definitely high, and this example just highlights that part.
And then I think the other thing that it highlights too is that you also kept some of the framework, the layout's the same. You were able to keep all of that while still changing some things that were important to each of those regions. So, and then I think the next slide.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Amit. Did you have one?
I was just saying I was just saying it was a mix of configuration plus some modifications, because the Global Knowledge as a customer, they wanted to kind of present the system as a unified or consistent system across all the customers, but they also wanted flexibility to be able to modify the look and feel and the logos of the customers, so that it looks a little different from each other, but the underlying framework, they still wanted to make it consistent so that they can deliver the same experience across user groups, multiple user groups. But they still wanted to accommodate slight features differences, like languages or the way they would present a little bit of information. But yes, the underlying framework was consistent, but they could change a few things for each user group differently.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this client in just a minute, because they actually provide training for other organizations, which is why you'll see the different logos and stuff, which I think works very well. I want to talk about one other thing before we jump into that case study, which is that global usability does go beyond just branding and look and feel and even features and functions. It also goes to things like the languages that we talked about, but also the regulation. So a lot of the things you mentioned around the AAVETMISS, that's a regulation requirement. I know there's regulation requirements put in Europe around the works councils, and there's regulation requirement and in Germany around who can see performance and competency information. And knowing those regulations is as much about the usability experience as anything else, so that you can work with the regulated environments and make sure that the end user still have a good experience. Same thing with technology requirements, and this is something I think sometimes people often forget about, which is that technology requirements are not just about, is it in the cloud? The cloud's a great environment to be in, but do you have locations where content is housed so that it can reach these environments quickly? Have you built the capability to be able to, manage your security and your logins even in a cloud environment so that you have the single sign-on environments. Same thing with cultural adaptations. We hear a lot of organizations talk about, if I'm working in the Middle East, I might have to actually flip my screen around and go from right to left instead of left to right. We might have to, in some regions, think about different colors we would use because colors might not fit a cultural expectation. Those are things that, again, having a solution provider who's worked in a global environment, they can help bring some of that to life, and you don't have to find that out in less productive ways. And I know, Amit, that's a lot of the stuff I think you work with your clients on in the front of the process versus the back end maybe when they get complaints from people about something not looking the way they expect it to look. So let's go real quickly. We're going to jump real quickly over some of the mobile piece. We've run a little bit long on some of the other areas, and I do want to get to the case study. So we're going to do I'm going to skip the poll question on mobile and talk just a little bit about frameworks for assessing mobile needs, because I think this gets back to that audience discussion that we had previously, which is that when you think about the user experience kind of moving into the mobile environment, now you not only have kind of the administrators and the managers, stakeholders, and your end user case studies for the PC environment, right, which is often where our heads first go, but you also have those use cases now for the mobile environment. It is just a delivery environment, and so you do have to think about your use cases as we talked about, and the administrative and setup, and the M-learning component, and the manager dashboards, and the support and the administrative work activities such as time tracking or approvals or assessment taking, how those things flow in the mobile environment as well as they do in the PC environment, the personal computer environment. And what you'll find is that as organizations look at a framework like this, they often forget about that when they're doing their use cases. We know from our most recent relationship-centered learning data that mobile learning isn't as prolific as we thought it would be. And you had kind of mentioned this, and this kind of plays out definitely on a regional level, that only about 37% of companies are doing any kind of mobile performance support, and 34% are doing any kind of mobile learning modules at all within their organization. And when we ask people on the bottom there about whether or not people are actually accessing information in those mobile environments, if they're offering mobile learning, only about a little over 15–20% when you add them together are accessing 50% or more of their content and information in these mobile environments, which is fine. It's just that we haven't come, I think, as far as we often think we have. So if you're just starting out in the mobile process, you're in a good place. You're probably where everybody else is at, and that's often the big story there. We do know that mobile tablet trends and mobile phone trends are important. I'm not going to go through these slides. They're very busy. There's something that when you download the decks, it's well worth looking at. These are stats on the estimated 2012 tablet shares, how many have actually sold in 2011, how many people are actually spending money through their tablets, those type of things. These are great things to look at to try and help you make some decisions about your end user expectations, and really going out and getting that information from them is the real valuable component. Same thing with mobile phone trends. How are people using mobile phones? What mobile phones are in the highest levels of use? There is now over 491.4 million smartphones in the world. 53% of the U.S. has smartphones now. And then if we look on a global level, worldwide mobile connections have reached 6 billion by December 2011, and then quickly catching up to the world's 7 billion population. So if you think about it, the world is connected. It's very mobile. But as Amit said, that doesn't mean that your environment is currently comfortable with learning being in that mobile environment. And I think that's the real interest here. And that means you have to think about that change management component. So I think, Amit, this is the case study. This is global knowledge that you guys are going to walk through and talk a little bit about. If someone's talking about how they're thinking about usability in their organization, particularly if it's in a mobile and a global environment. Global Knowledge was an organization you guys felt really had thought about that and thought about the different regions they were serving and what their usability needs were with them. Can you maybe spend a few minutes talking about this case study, Amit?
Sure, thanks for that. I think this is definitely an interesting case study in the context of the topic we are discussing today. Global Knowledge, as I mentioned before, is a US headquartered company which trains other multiple companies on IT areas, specifically like Microsoft, Cisco, Oracle, and multiple areas like that. So it's a large organization. And our customer was the Global Knowledge from UK, and they have customers across the European region and even in the US and other areas. Now, when we talked to them about the LMS, they were using a system before our system was implemented at their side. And their key interest in changing to a new system was the usability part, primarily from the learner perspective. Because what they were looking for, in their own words, they were not looking for an LMS, they were looking for a collaborative platform. And they in fact call it CLP. That's the name they have given to the LMS implemented at their side finally. So, for them it was an environment where the users, they first, I remember because I was involved in the discussions in the beginning, the key things they were looking for were that the user should be able to access most of the things they need to access right from the dashboard or the home page. They should have clear widgets or areas available in the dashboard which makes them aware, alert, and also makes them access information within the from the first page itself, and they don't have to wonder or think about where will I find this information or that information. So I think the primary need was a system which lets users spend less time thinking where and how to reach something and quickly seeing that on the homepage itself. So in terms of the, we spent a lot of time in coming up with a design of how that would look like. And that is where, a lot of efforts were spent in, because our system has been designed in a certain manner and we modified that to be able to come up with the design they were looking for. So they, on the dashboard or the home page, they had access to the learning area. They have access to social features like you can see everybody who's online on the chat module. You can see communities. You can see discussion forums. And yet they wanted that to be not very cluttered, very intuitively placed. So it was a challenging task, but it was successful in the end. And on the top of that, what they were looking for was also a multilingual platform. All of this then, in multiple languages. So I think that those are the key areas they were looking for. And it's been about I think almost close to a year now they've been using this system. And the next phase we're working on is extending the entire CLP they have on mobile devices. So that's we're working on that with them right now. But that's the next step where they are now, because the feedback they've received so far from their customers is that I think they're ready for the next step, which is learning on mobile devices, and they're extending the entire CLP platform onto mobile devices now. So we're working on that with them, and it's a learning phase for us, because it was one of our I would say first global customers who kind of looked at those areas. Though we have these things in our system already built in, but to work with a customer on a real requirement was definitely a good task for us.
And Amit, can you maybe give us, in working through their mobile discussion that you're doing with them, are you finding that you're having to think even more about some of the cultural differences or some of the global expectations around mobile, or are you finding that what you did in the PC is translating to what you guys are doing in the mobile environment pretty easily?
It's a mix of both things. It's a little easier, than what we did in the PC one, because I think when we made the PC one, a lot of challenges were discussed and kind of worked out in that phase. And in the mobile one, we do have, we've discussed with them a few things which are specific to each region, but I think it is still, a more or less, because the PC one is kind of, finalized and fixed and it's working now. The first step is to extend that, with the kind of a, change in the way it is designed and its kind of interface is built onto the mobile devices. And then again, the same requirements will be there for the mobile one, which is multilingual. It has to work on multiple devices. So, but yeah, I think the challenges are a little different and lesser than we had in the beginning with the global knowledge for the PC one, because I think that is where we actually worked out all the key differences across the culture. And I think once we implement the first phase of the mobile platform, I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback from the customer, from their customers, and we're looking forward to that phase where we can then actually get a lot of good feedback on the differences in how or what the users expect from the mobile platform.
Great. And I think, not only are organizations looking at mobile, but the social component too. And like I said, I'll go ahead and skip this question, how important is social learning and collaboration in LMS environment, just so that we can maybe move into kind of the wrapping up of the event. But social learning is growing. We know that what percentage of your training is done via social delivery method. About over 50% now of organizations are doing some sort of social in their learning environment. This again comes out of the relationship-centered learning. That was really nice to see when we got those numbers. We also know that organizations are expecting people to combine their social learning environments with their social learning environments, which means that when you're thinking about end user experience, you really do have to think about what are people doing in the social living environment, such as sharing links, event invitations, friend requests. I mean, these are things that, this is just Facebook and not counting all the other social environments. But knowing that that at some level has to be replicated in the social environment in a learning space. And so what you see, and these are a couple of examples here of how I think Upside Learning has created environments where they're sort of matching as much as they can the social environments that you see in both the personal lives that these end users are interacting with, and now taking into their social learning environments. So, for example, here in this My Community, you'll notice they have friends and messages and My Twitter connected to that, along with discussion boards and videos that they can connect and access. Again, the ability to upload, add content, have a conversation with a larger community. And then you kind of move down here, and I think these are some discussion boards, and I'll let you kind of talk through these a little bit, and then you go into sort of the video component of this, and you've got kind of this you've built an environment where people can kind of go through an additive social component where they're building a social dialogue through video and chats and threaded discussions. And Amit, you find that a lot of your customers are using social even more than they were just a year or so ago. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. We found, in fact, some of our customers who were on our earlier version of the system, we have moved into the new version primarily for social learning modules. So, I think as a company or organization, grows with an LMS, and the usage and the adoption of that system per se, and the kind of philosophy per se, kind of imbibes into the company, I think the use of social learning becomes almost imperative and very, very required, because users, when they come to a system, primarily an LMS, they increasingly need more than just access to the training. They, there's a basic need to connect with other people, talk about their experiences, understand what somebody else is doing. So I think tools like internal tutor to the system, or areas where they can upload photos and videos, and they can comment on photos and videos from other people, and make a community with people with similar interests, or have an open discussion forum where they can just reach out to anybody with asking a question. Because not everybody would want to ask a question directly to an expert. They just want to raise a question in the group and say, okay, does anyone know this or know that? I think we have seen both the adoption and also the need to use social learning increase within our customer base. That's very correct in saying that. Mm-hmm. And especially for global learning, their main focus was to create a system which is more than just delivering training. So they were looking to create an environment where users can come in and they can feel a part of a bigger kind of a group, where they know there were the people. So they wanted to make it a little bit more human than just going to a system, accessing training, and come out of the system. So they had modules like chat module, which is a very good tool to make people feel comfortable to talk to each other, or able to upload videos or photos, or talk to each other in a community. I think that's definitely a good advantage to have in a system, especially for a global environment where people may not know each other easily, and they're spread across multiple areas. I think it's definitely a very, very easy and good tool to be able to reach out to multiple people.
Yeah, and I know we're running over just by a few moments, so if anybody wants to stay with us, but we will record the event. You will receive the recording, so if you do have to leave, please know that, and we'll try and cover as much as we can this last few moments here. But I do want to say, I mean, I think, some of the examples you've given here are really, they really show that, the mirroring of kind of the social experience. I know when I go on Facebook and that chat window pops up, it's really comfortable for me to type in and start typing to people because I know they're there and available, and it's connected to something that I'm doing on Facebook. And I know that's probably how a lot of people feel in the market today. Same thing with the video being connected to the work that you're doing, as well as the threaded discussions. All of those become a very social component. One last thing we just want to ask everyone is, how do you know your learner expectations? And we're going to go ahead and do this poll. I know there's not many people here, but we're going to go ahead and run it. How do you know your learner expectations? And we're just going to go ahead and launch that, give people a few moments to answer that if there's anybody out there still listening. We use governance bodies, we complete end-user surveys, we conduct focus groups or other, and we'll give everyone just a few moments to answer that, because I think it's interesting to understand, how do people gather their end-user expectations? Because all the things we talked about today are great ways to think about your end users, to understand the challenges that they're facing, to understand what they are expecting from you. But I'm going to go ahead and close that window now. And with a little over 60% of the participants here in the session still, we have about 14% said we use governance bodies, 54% said we complete end user surveys, 18% said we conduct focus groups, and if there's other, I've asked people to put that in the Q&A box. We have a couple of such things as we develop training so we're close to the end users, and then they use other metrics that people share. So we'll go ahead and share that, and then we're going to go ahead and hide that, but just so that'll be on the screen when people go back and look at it. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to the next, because I think this is really where it comes down to, is all those things are important, but your first thing you have to do, whether they're global, whether they're national, whether they're within your own region, is understand the learner's expectations. We know that people do a lot of end-user, manager, administrative surveys. We did see that already. We do a lot of people who do workflow focus groups. This is sort of an interesting one where you take 2 or 3 people who are a focus group and you ask them to walk you through their workflow process. A really good way to get expectations, not just in learning, but the whole process, like how do they maybe go in and fill out a form that then requires some learning in it, or how do they go in and do a process where they might stop in the middle and have to get some learning through it. So the whole work process. There is a lot of end-user testing that often gets done. That means actually putting someone in a room, letting them just go and work on the environment and actually watching what they're doing. There's even programs out there that will actually capture all the clicks, where someone moves, where they actually do. That is something that if you don't want to spend that type of money to do it, sometimes your solution provider might have something that does that. There's a lot of ways to gather that information. Tailored time and motion and task analysis. This really is that, you might have an organization that would actually come in and actually watch how people actually get their work done. Through that, they'll point out the places where learning is most important, and that's really great when you have maybe an environment where you're not in a PC all the time, but maybe it's on a frontline environment. Finally, providing easy-to-access feedback tools and locations in your system. This is one of the things I think are often forgotten, is that there's, you kind of think about, okay, now once they're in the system, we've got everything trained, everyone's doing fine, and, kind of the contact us information place is buried in your environment. Easy to access places where they can not only just get Q&A information, like they can go up and click the little question mark box, but inside of there, some way for them to give you feedback is a huge component about, because people are pretty good about giving feedback. If something's not working the way they'd like to, if they give feedback, the number one thing we tell organizations is if you get feedback, make sure you act on it. Make sure you let people know you're acting on it, because if you don't, there's some real challenges there. There are some tools that you can also use, such as like Google Analytics. and there's some coding within things like Google Analytics that can let you know what mobile devices people or what browsers people are actually accessing your environment through. There are some tools you can go to different websites to kind of see how your tool sets will look in different browsers. Those are also things that you can look at, and a lot of those you can find on websites where people are able to go to kind of say user testing or end user testing sites for websites, and so they go through some of the same models like that. And just kind of as a last question, Amit, I know we're a little bit over, but is there any other recommendations that you guys have seen that people have, or processes they've used or tools they might have used to really understand what their learners are expecting and the environments that their learners are working in? Oh, we might have lost Amit.
No, I'm there. I just kind of was on mute.
Oh, sorry.
I think the primary thing we've seen is definitely feedback, not only once or twice, but across a period of time, and regular feedback, because things keep changing and the learner requirements keep changing over a period of time, as the other websites are developing, and how new workforce people come in with new ideas. I think a regular feedback mechanism and also a way within the system to be able to capture some feedback is definitely a way we've seen some companies who are evolved in their processes to understand learner needs. They use a continuous and regular process of getting feedback from the users directly. And also I think as companies use LMS over a period of time, this process becomes much more I would say much smoother, and then we've seen that's the good ways to capture feedback and understand how learner needs are changing.
And I also think, too, we got some great comments over here, which is that we use advisor groups from key customers to learn features they desire. We also got a comment here. We also gather enhancement requests from all customers. So I think that's a good thing to think about, is that a lot of times this is, we've talked a lot about employees here, but a big portion of your audience is often the extended enterprise, which are customers or clients, and those are all often good ways to go out and get their commentary as well. So all of these, I think, are great examples of how people can get and we had another person there that said, we develop training so we are close to the end user. So in developing your training, there's an easy way to maybe also get very close to your learners. There's different ways that you can gather this information for multiple organizations. Just kind of wrapping up today in summary, I think we've covered a lot of topics. I know we ran over a little bit today because we started a little bit late trying to get everybody corralled after Jason was unable to attend, and we do hope that everything's going well for him and his family. But just, a couple of wrap-ups here is organizations are focused on leveraging learning technology more effectively. There's no doubt about that. LMSs have a lot of features and functions, but usability is the real use case evaluation. All the features and functions are great, but if you can't get the usability out of your use case, it's really not of the value to you as an organization. Some usability standards are shared globally, while others are not. That was some great stuff that Amit kind of shared with us. Mobile and social learning is a big driver of current usability discussion, so no matter how you look at it, you really can't talk about usability without at least getting down at some level to the mobile discussion, the social discussion with almost all organizations. Some regions are a little bit farther ahead, while others are a little bit farther behind, but you do have to have that as part of your dialogue these days. And think broadly and globally when gathering end user expectations. Don't kind of focus just narrowly on maybe conducting a survey, or as Amit pointed out, don't just focus on the beginning of the process, but create a way that you have consistent feedback coming into you. Because if you don't do that, it's easy, again, to get very sucked into kind of working on projects, filling up that LMS, but not really looking at the end user expectations. So and I want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I know we're running a little bit over for questions, but we will try and answer as many of them as we can via email follow-up for everyone. And I know Erin's been trying to answer them on the chatter box, so if you put a question in, please take a look at some of the answers that she's put in there. So thank you, Erin, for doing that for us, because we were running a little bit over. Amit, any last comments before we, on the summary, before we wrap up the webinar today?
Thank you, Stacy. I think I would just want to highlight on the usability part. We have been selling LMS for a long time now, and as we have personally seen experiences with our sales process, I think it is already becoming a very big and critical factor in evaluation of the LMS systems, because as more and more LMSs are becoming almost similar in terms of what they offer as functionality and modules, I think the real differentiator is now becoming, is now coming to how easy and how good it is to use. And does it work on various devices? Does it work on all browsers? Is it social learning compatible? I think the usability coupled with the mobile and social learning definitely I think are becoming the key factors of evaluation, because I think more and more usage of LMS is now driven by the learners. So learners are also giving feedback to the organization. So I think it is becoming a very big factor in evaluation of these systems now, and definitely something which everybody should be looking out for when they are looking to either switch to a new LMS or looking for a completely new LMS system.
Yeah, thanks. And I would have to agree, Amit, from what we're seeing, as you noted, features and functions are being pretty common across all the systems. It really is coming down to that experience for the end user. So yeah, great comments, kind of wrapping things up. So thanks everyone. Thanks again to Upside Learning for again allowing us to present an educational session for everyone. If you do have any questions after the event, please feel free to contact myself or Jason, who will probably be back in action here pretty soon. So feel free to link to him or Amit and the Upside Learning team. Also feel free if you want to connect with us on LinkedIn or through Twitter. We'd love to do that. We'd love to hear kind of what's going on in your work environment, and let us know also if there's any additional questions that we can answer for you. So we just want to say goodbye to everyone. Thanks again for the time you've given us today, and Amit, thanks again for your great opportunity of kind of jumping at the last minute and helping us through the presentation. So thanks everyone, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stacey. Thanks, everybody.